when you hit me so hard.
Might be one that she's gonna hit you with.
Yeah, great.
Okay, good morning.
Thank you.
6 minutes after.
Petrified mood?
So we have a couple of videos today I want to go through of some that we didn't hit the last time. Kurt Wise, he's got a PhD from Harvard. We did watch one of them with him before, but there's other ones that he has that I think is pretty cool to watch. But on your tables, you'll see that there's some stuff on the, you've heard me say that we have what we commonly call as a family of Fossil Creek. And I have pictures of the creek because I took some yesterday and I was down there just kind of futzing around, and some of these are from yesterday. I cleaned them. Some of them you can see the sediment layers. Others you can actually see the fossils in them. It's pretty cool. I have one up here that I actually took apart. And there's a shell on this top part here, and the actual shell is on the other part here. So it's pretty cool. And you can break these things apart. That's why I have this up here, because it is rather delicate. And I thought that was kind of cool. So if you want to see that. So to get started today, you know about, we've read before a couple of times, 1 Peter or 2 Peter chapter 3, about why there's so many who hold to the conventional paradigm, because they can't shake it, because they would have to, if they did come over and look at the evidence over here, it would be hard for them not to believe it, but they're not willing to say that there is God that had created everything as we believe, and then destroyed it as we believe with water, and will destroy it again with fire the next time. But that's a whole nother story, right, Tom? But we'll talk about that at another date, about what's coming. But he gives us enough clues and enough items that that's the general revelation, where you see his handiwork everywhere. And that's why we believe that there is a God, that he makes himself known by the beauty and complexity of his creation. So that's what we're studying today. I'll get over here and get Kurt going here. First, let's share it. Come on, where's my thing? Jim, why isn't it showing me that? I can't find my share
Oh,
button.
your share button. Looks like you're in the video player 19 in your Zoom.
It says Zoom meeting over here.
Yeah.
So I want to share here.
Yeah. Good audio.
Share sound.
Share.
Share that. Do I hit share again?
Yes.
You know, I was listening to a speaker talking about tribulation. And he said that you'd think that the people would see the evidence and they would understand. He says, but even when they know, at the end of the tribulation, they're cursing God. They're not.
Yeah.
They still won't.
Well, it's at the end of the kingdom age, where Christ is actually here on earth, ruling and reigning, but there are still some at the end that will not believe. So they fall into the pit along with so yeah, I guess it's not an uncommon thing. So let's listen to Kurt here. He's definitely from Tennessee, you can tell, but he's got a lot of great information. What's that?
Nothing wrong with Tennessee.
No, not wrong.
I can interpret the
This is amazing. What is this?
Yeah, this is quite spectacular. This is called the Dayton Coal and Iron Company back about 100 years ago. This was the entrance to a coal mine.
But what's amazing is if you didn't know that history and if you looked at these rocks, you would think they were very ancient. In fact, if we were in Greece, we might think they're thousands of years old.
It's hard to tell just looking at the structure itself.
Right.
Certainly helpful to know the local history of the area and know, oh, okay,
Yeah.
now I understand.
If you know the history now, you can
yeah,
understand.
it's only 100 years old.
You understand the rocks. Well, Kurt, then I need for you to do something because we've been a lot of places. We've seen a lot of evidence that points back, maps back to that historical narrative in Genesis. But we need kind of that bigger picture because the conventional story sees Earth history more as a straight line, more of just general slow processes. But the history we see in Genesis tells us something radically different. And I understand you see it more in terms of major epochs. What are those and how do you see that?
Yeah, that's a good point. In 2 Peter chapter 3, it talks about people in the latter days saying, where's the promise of this coming? For all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. That concept that what you see in the present, what's happening right now, what's happening in the creek down below, what is happening at every place on the earth is the way it's always been. It's always been for all of Earth history.
Those are scoffers.
Right, there's scoffers that say that. So the passage goes on to say, for this they are willingly ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
They're not just ignorant of these truths, they're purposely rejecting these truths. And it lists the creation and the flood. These are apparently events, according to the Bible, that aren't like the present.
Right.
And the neat thing is, that's what we see here. I mean, you've got events even here, like those rocks right up there. That cliff isn't actually in place. That cliff belongs about 1,000 feet up. It's slid down to its current location. That's a pretty big boulder.
That's huge. It's
okay,
massive.
now what kind of process in the present slides, blocks that big down? This thing continues for a mile.
Oh my.
It's actually goes up the other side and down. The whole thing slid down from above, pointing to an event some time ago that's unlike anything in the present. But inside those rocks are yet further evidence of an event before that that's even bigger, even more unlike the present. And then inside those rocks are also fossils of a time period that's very different than the present. So that, according to the claims of Scripture and according to my own experience, you can't use the present to judge the past, to understand the past.
And that passage you're referring to, they willfully ignore that. It implies then that it's visible, or it implies that it could be seen then.
That's right. That's
So-
right. I mean, there's evidence in these rocks that scream out. It screams something is weird going on, something that's very unusual, not understandable from the present. What I feel from Scripture is you've got to go to Scripture to find out what it is we're looking at, because you can't judge it from the present. There's something much bigger than anything that occurs in the present in there. So that's why I have to go to Scripture to find out what happened in the past to try to understand those things.
That's the same thing here, because if we walked onto this archway and didn't have the history, the real history, we wouldn't have a clue of what this all is, but it's that history that helps us understand that. And that's what you're saying about the history we have in Genesis that gives us that framework.
Right. I wasn't there. You weren't there. No one's alive on the planet right now was there when these things were happening. But we can consult an eyewitness who was there. God was there, and he wrote it down. And he tells us in his word that there's some events in the past that you cannot understand from the present. For example, the flood. That is apparently an event, according to 2 Peter, that you can't infer from the present. Now you can tell that something big has occurred in the past, but not specifically a global flood. So one of those things the Bible points out is that. But if you go all the way back to the beginning, you realize that the Bible lays out what I would call epochs of Earth history.
Major periods of time.
Just different things happening during each of these epochs, that if you lived in any one of the other epochs, you would never understand the previous epoch, because it's so different. The first one is the creation itself. In 6 days, God created the entire universe. He created the planets and the stars, and he stretched out the universe with his outstretched arm. That's obviously not happening today. He's not creating planets. In fact, at the end of that passage, he says he ended his creation work.
He rested.
So he did things during that week that have never been seen by humans again. We can't study the present universe and figure out what happened during that. We need that information from the Bible to know he created, and he created by the word of his mouth.
All right.
And it terminates with God himself just simply ceasing, and so it terminates suddenly. Then we move into what I call the Edenian epoch, the period of time when Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden. And it's distinctly different from the creation because, again, he's sustaining the universe, he's active in holding the universe together, but he's no longer creating things.
So we have the perfect world here at this point.
And it's
right?
very different than the present. We get the impression from that passage, for example, that Adam and Eve, if they had not sinned, would have lived forever. Well, that's weird.
Yeah.
We can't, it's hard to even conceive of human beings living forever.
We can't relate to that.
And it's so different from the
Yeah.
present. But the passage also implies that even animals would have lived forever, that there was no death of any kind. In fact, God, at the end of his creation week, looked at everything he had created and made, and behold, it was very good. Its impression, it was, as you put it, perfect. Yeah. It's somehow a world with no evil, no natural evil, no disasters, no natural disasters. Those things are not occurring. Animals and plants are in mutual symbiosis. There's no disease, there's no decay. If there was, I mean, that would be horrible. If you could never die, but you had disease, you'd be, that'd be hell. Sure. So it's a different world, wildly different. How long it lasts, we don't know, but it suddenly terminated with Adam and Eve eating of the tree of the knowledge good and evil,
rebelling
and
against
God cursing the creation. He changed the rules in the universe. Now no longer is the sun going to be able to burn forever. No longer are we going to be able to live forever. The entire creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. So we enter into a new epoch.
Yeah, that's a radical change then.
Very radical change. We've changed the rules of the entire universe. Somehow the universe could exist forever before that.
Yeah.
The sun could burn forever without ever burning out? That's an interesting concept. That operated during the Edenian epoch, but never since then.
So it's hard for us to even imagine what that would be like because we only see the laws or...
And we wouldn't have come to that conclusion if we didn't have
true,
the Word
if
of
we
God.
didn't have this.
And that's what I think the Word of God has been given to us for. It's giving us information we would never... We know that something different happened, but we'd never get the what actually happened because we just don't have enough information. But God gives us that information in His Word. So we slide into the third epoch of time, what I call the antediluvian. It's long been called the antediluvian period. The period before the flood and after the fall of man. And I set it as a separate epoch because it's terminated with the flood. It is destroyed by the flood. And we can see the evidence of it in the fossils of the dinosaurs, the trilobites, the nautiloids, the plants that are in these rocks and so on. It's a world that's different than the present. It's got the same natural laws going on, but it's a different set of critters, different set of plants. It's a little bit warmer Earth. It's the continents are in different positions from what they are now. It looks significantly different.
And that's what we read in that Peter passage, right? Where he says that the Lord destroyed the earth. So that's this major change from the antediluvian epoch now into something radically different.
Yeah, if we're right about what we've understood so far, we got continents moving, smashing together, creating mountains. You've got water washing across entire continents. We've got just a few dozen miles to the east of here, we've got the Smokies. We've got sand grains from the Smokies in the Grand Canyon. They're being carried across the entire continent. We're washing away mountains. Tens of thousands of feet of mountains are being washed away in the matter of months. We're ripping thousands of feet of sediment off of the old continents and then depositing thousands of feet of sediment on top of them again.
Yeah.
We're looking at earthquakes of astonishing power. So this is, when God is serious about taking care of sin,
Boy, he's serious.
he's serious.
Yeah.
It's a complete destruction.
So this change then from what you call the antediluvian epoch now into the post-flood. Now we're talking about Noah's grandson.
Now we move into what I call the Arphaxadian epoch. I love the name of that. Now Arphaxad is, in the Bible, Arphaxad is the son of Shem. He's born 2 years after the flood and lives for 400 years following the flood. So his lifetime is, from my perspective as a geologist, a really cool period of Earth history. Basically, the Earth has got to recover from a global flood. Everything's got to recover. The atmosphere's got to recover, the geology, the rocks have to recover, plants and animals have to spread across the earth, they have to repopulate. They've only selected a few critters onto the ark, they've got to increase in numbers. All that recovery, it appears, occurred within a few hundred years of the flood, during Arphaxad's life. You take whatever happened in the flood, it's big. You got lots of water, you got humongous earthquakes, you got humongous volcanoes, things that are incomprehensible to think of even in the present. And more or less that period of recovery is a slow decrease in intensity and frequency of those things. So the huge volcanoes get smaller and smaller and smaller.
But they're still pretty big then.
Well, they're still
evidently,
pretty
in the
big.
beginning.
Yeah, they're still pretty big for decades and centuries.
Yeah.
In fact, the volcanoes that we have today are leftover remnants of the flood. We're really still in the flood geologically. The motion of rocks that was set in place by the flood, rocks that are too high, too thick, and they're sinking because they're too thick, or they're too thin, so they're rising, it's going to take 10,000, 15,000 years to fully recover from the flood. So we're still in the technically, I could extend the Arphaxadian epoch all the way to the present, except that probably 80% of all that recovery occurred during his lifetime. So I set that apart as a distinct period. It's kind of like the present, but bigger. And it gets bigger and bigger as you go towards the flood.
So we have this almost like an exponential curve you're talking about.
Yep.
And so that period, would you say around 400 years, that's that period where there's still a lot of trembling going on, but then it starts to bottom out. But we still have evidences of
That's
that.
right.
Yeah.
So I like to say, here's a profound statement. The flood is probably the wettest period in Earth history. Okay, and then the earth has dried out since, and it's still drying. The flood had the biggest earthquakes in Earth history, and the earthquakes have been decreasing in intensity ever since. The flood had the biggest volcanoes in Earth history, and they've been decreasing ever since. The hugest storms, we have storms that are probably continent-sized or bigger during the flood, and they decrease in size towards the tiny little hurricanes that we have today. And so everything, climate, temperature, everything is bringing the Earth back to the original, or towards the original design of the Earth.
So would it be in that period that we would see the Ice Age, for example?
Yes, that's ironically, the Ice Age turns out to be, in our modeling, a consequence of the heating of the water during the flood and the process of cooling the water to recover the Earth's water temperatures to what they were before. If you wish, the air conditioner for that generated the Ice Age.
So we have the heated water from the flood, but now in this post-flood era, that heated water now is generating a lot of atmospheric issues.
It's generating a lot of water. Water is evaporating off the oceans, that cools the oceans. The water is then moving over the continents and dropping enormous volumes of water on the oceans, producing huge lakes. Lakes, for example, that would fill up and then burst through their dams and produce something like the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
So you got lakes like this all over the world. Now in certain places, the oceans are going to cool enough that the rain's going to come down as snow, but coming down so rapidly and without break that it can't melt and accumulates into thick sequences of ice, centered on the Hudson Bay and centered on Antarctica. until they're miles thick. And then when the oceans had cooled enough that that rain generation system had stopped, then those glaciers then collapse under their own weight, melt back to the current position, and they're continuing to melt. You know, this thing, global warming, it's recovering, the Earth is still recovering from the flood. It's still recovering from the ice consequences that came from the cooling of the oceans following the flood.
So that was really a fairly tumultuous era right then, but then you have one final epoch. Is that where we are today?
Yeah, our present epoch. So the modern epoch is you can study present processes and understand things fairly readily back to within a couple centuries of the flood. Then things get really weird, and so I set that as a separate epoch, something that you have to put on a different set of thinking caps.
Right,
to
no, I like that
understand
because this epoch we're in is pretty much a stasis epoch, right? Things are
close,
fairly, and so that would lead one to think that these processes, if you take them all the way back,
Precisely.
Right.
You take the present processes and extend them into the back, and that's what 2 Peter says. All things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. So they take the current, we've come down to this, now let's take that all the way back. If you did this much work in a short amount of time, how much of this would it take? It's basically the area under the curve. You'd take a long time to do what happened very quickly in the flood. And so that's the error people make. It's reasonable. Take the present and extend it into the past. Not unreasonable. But there's evidence in the rocks themselves that you can't do that. So you need to go to the Bible to find out the necessary information to reconstruct it. And looking at it the other way, if you start from the Bible, you only get the beginning of the story. God has given us the ability to read the rocks and fill in the rest of the story. And we need to fully understand the flood, we start with the Bible, but then we go to the rocks. Speak to the rocks and they shall tell thee what has happened in the past.
So the evidence in the rocks, does that mean we have to go up there to see them, or?
Well, actually, we don't have to. There's evidence of the flood, the Arphaxadian epoch, and the world that came before it. But actually, the rocks continue on down to the level of the trail. So we can see them by just walking down the trail. Much easier.
That's it.
So let's do that.
And you picked a great day for this.
Oh man.
It's absolutely awesome.
So what's some of the things that we learned before that they're showing here in the current paradigm, where they say that it took billions and billions and billions of years to create what we see now? What's different? Why did they do that? Anybody remember? There's people like Lyell, Darwin. Some of the scientists back in the 1800s say that you had to, it was a rule, you had to take today's rates of what happened and stuff and move them all the way back to everything that you seek. So what they're saying here, and he'll show it more with what was happening during the flood, it was catastrophe. I mean, everything was changing. Right now they had the earthquake in Russia that was 8.8. That's a pretty strong earthquake. And he's saying that it's nothing compared to what was happening when you had tectonic plates moving everywhere, smashing into places, making the mountains really, really rise. So the current paradigm where you're saying, okay, the biggest earthquakes now is what was happening then. You can't move everything like that without having larger ones. And he's going to prove here in a minute that there was a much bigger happening than we've had. I do a lot of talking and will do a lot of talking unless you guys, come in. What are your thoughts during that?
Well, I think that the conventional, they're basing it on their rates that it was always continuously back, and I don't want to acknowledge that that's impossible. Because the flood, everything happened so fast, you can't use the same rate calculation,
Exactly.
you know,
Mhm.
because it wasn't the same. It's the,
Because with using the same time frame today, what does that make the timeline look like?
Yeah.
It makes it into the billions of
Yeah,
years
and that's
that
what
it's
they
happened
do.
and stuff, and what we've learned about the dating process. What have we learned about that?
Kind of bogus.
Theirs is bogus because they're not taking into account how quickly some of the things happen. And the evidence doesn't show that.
The date systems in with the initial state. They're
Right.
assuming certain conditions at the beginning and then a natural decay rate. Decay rate might be correct, but the initial condition is that demonstrated wrong.
Yeah, because they're not, they're thinking that everything was homeostasis all the way through all the billions of years, that everything stayed the same. Well, it didn't, it couldn't with what was happening. So, you
But
know,
isn't it just like an earthquake today? I mean, initially it's this big whatever,
mhm.
and then the aftershocks, for the most part, are not as catastrophic as the initial, you know.
Because if you're having mountains, basically making mountains out of molehills, basically. That is, I mean, the earthquakes have to be huge. If you're, if in the Himalayas where there's 3 continents that came together and were shoving things up to the highest places, it couldn't have been. Yeah, I mean, you could have felt that throughout the whole thing. I mean, it's weird how they do that, and the way that the dating is today. It's, we can go back and look at it, but Andrew Snelling said it doesn't match up. They're all three. There were 3 ways of dating rocks, and none of them matched, and they should have matched if it was correct. And he's proven that. And he's also, and then you have the carbon dating that are supposed to be in things, and that's, relatively stable. But after 90,000 years, it should be gone, and it isn't. And even petrified rock, they see it, and it should have been long gone since then. So,
And he talked about how sin affected each area. I mean, as far as them living 400 years old.
I don't want to be here 400 years. Can you imagine what it would look like?
Well, what I'm referring to is the sin effect on creation
Oh, yeah.
is,
And I mean, like you said, in the Edenian epoch, as he says it, things were never going to go. There's no death. But because of Adam's sin, it changed.
but the sin on the effect it had on it is remarkable to me.
Mhm.
When when the flood happened was because the sin was
Oh, yeah,
constant,
that's the reason why he,
evil.
yeah, why did he do the flood? Why did he do it? Because sin was rampant. There was only one family that was good enough to bring into the next one.
Mhm.
That must have been a wild ride.
Which
I was
goes,
thinking from the water, if all this stuff's happening underneath, it seems like he'd be going up and down.
Well, the
You think
water
Grandma
was, yeah, well, you wouldn't want to do been on the earth at that point, for sure. But up on water probably was relatively tame.
Oh, you think so?
Well,
Wouldn't it cause?
after the
waves
40
and-
days, it was probably tame.
yeah,
Yeah,
after the rains
But then you got a
stopped.
whole year of
Mhm.
just more.
I mean, it had, I
Okay,
mean,
there's also
But and the dinosaurs that they find with food in their mouth and shows that it was a sudden thing. It wasn't a slow process.
Yeah, he talks about that in
Yeah.
this one, in one of the ones, I don't think it's this time. But he talks about the mammoth, woolly mammoths and whatnot and how it had happened. So. Yeah, it's, sure is amazing. I just don't understand what's up or what's up, Jim. What am I doing wrong? Huh? Oh, now I can't see.
What? You can see. It's hard, so you can start with sure. It's in the right to the other side. It is invited.
Which one? This is the one I'm in. So, share this.
That's the other thing that jumps up. You can live 400 years, his.
Married for 400 years.
That's what you get out of that.
Make sure you get the right one.
So that cliff I was talking about, we followed it along here, and now it's coming down to the trail level. Look at the log right there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my
Right
goodness.
there. Yeah, right in the middle of that convoluted bedding.
This is massive, Kurt.
Yes.
I mean, it's just hard to imagine
And,
this
and it
thing
continues
sliding
on
down.
from here. So, it's been half a mile that we've followed it here. It continues on for another 3/4 of a mile. Imagine this whole cliff is not in place. It's slid down from above. And the same cliff goes up the other side. So the whole thing slid down into this valley.
Uh-huh.
It indicates a time when this valley was cut out very rapidly, much more rapidly than any process we're familiar with in the
That's
present.
all post-flood here, all these
This would be
events.
the Arphaxadian epoch
Arphaxadian.
stuff. It's similar to the present, just bigger.
Yeah,
Okay, we see boulders in the present eroding off of cliffs.
not,
Not
This
this
is just-
scale. Not
it's
this scale.
massive.
This is huge. So we're looking at that Arphaxadian epoch when we kind of imagine in your mind that boulder sliding down the hillside.
but the rocks themselves are pointing to something, to the epoch before that, to the
Right,
flood. is that
exactly.
right?
The rocks that have actually slid down show evidence in them of a time before that.
Yeah, so what are we seeing then in the rocks?
Well, this is a really cool place. This is a kill zone. During the time that this rock was being formed, this would not be a place that any organism could survive. This was complete destruction. This is catastrophism on a magnificent scale. About halfway up this cliff here, you can see kind of a blotchy pattern.
Oh, yeah.
You got layers
Right.
above and layers below,
Right.
but a blotchy pattern in between. It's about 6 feet thick. That's actually what we call a seismite. When you've got soft sediment that an earthquake shock wave runs through, it deforms that sediment. And in fact, it settles the sediment down, causes water to come out, which deforms it. And that's called a seismite. It's made by seismic or earthquake activity. This is 6 feet thick. Now, you're probably not familiar with seismites to know how incredible that is. We can produce seismites in the laboratory, or I can go to the edge of a ocean or a lake in that wet zone of the sand along the shore and stand there. Now you gotta make sure no one's looking to see this, but you stand there and you vibrate. And if you vibrate, you'll notice that when you do, the sand will almost liquefy. Water comes
Yes,
out of the
right.
sand and runs down to the water. Now if you look closely, what's happening is you're vibrating the sand, it's occupying less volume, and it's pushing the water out from what was between the sand grains, and it's escaping and then flowing down. Now, if you look closely, you'll see that the water comes up in little tiny volcanoes here and there, kind of bubbles up. And if, again, you got to make sure no one's looking, and you go down there and cut into the sand in the middle of one of those little volcanoes, you're going to see the layers of sand going down the beach. But in that place where the volcano is, they're bent upwards. The water has left the sand and come out of the sand, creating what we call a fluid evulsion structure. Now, in your incredible power on the edge of a body of water, you can produce fluid evulsion structures that are about 1/8 of an inch high, something like 1/4 inch. Earthquakes are bigger. They can create bigger structures, and bigger the earthquake, the bigger the structures. So a decent earthquake that is shaking buildings produces 1 inch or so of fluid evulsion
Only
structure.
an inch of
An
a
inch,
seismite?
yeah. Now the biggest earthquakes that we've witnessed in the last 50, 60 years since seismometers have been developed produce 11 inches. The big Anchorage, Alaska earthquake of 1964, 8.2, something like that on the Richter scale, monster earthquake, produced about 11 inches of convolutions or seismites.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And as near as I can tell, when you double the thickness of your convolutions, your seismite, it requires an earthquake about 16 or so times bigger. This thing's 6 feet. So it's 6 times
that's beyond
the
imagination,
thickness of the biggest earthquakes we're familiar with in the present. So we're talking about a time with earthquakes that are unimaginable.
Right.
Huge earthquakes. Probably no process on the present Earth is capable of doing that. And so we have a period of huge earthquakes, but that's not all. Because for that seismite to work, you've got to have deposited that 6 feet of sand very quickly,
Oh, that has
full of water, still full of water to create that. And so we got 6 feet of sand deposited very rapidly, then hit by that earthquake. So we've got evidence of very rapid deposition, very deep deposition, and you can see here at one layer we've got what we call cross beds. The layers cross up into, you've got a bed of a certain thickness, there's one there, it's beautiful, it's about 1 foot thick or so, and the beds within that bed cross it. These are called cross beds. So if water is moving and carrying sand, it carries sand in and deposits the sand down the front face of a dune.
It's like we saw in the Grand Canyon.
Yes, you would have seen some very large cross beds there. And that's indicating that moving water is carrying sand grains and depositing this. So it's not just depositing sand very quickly, it's depositing sand in moving water, and all these cross beds face in one direction. They're all going that way. In fact, not just here, but everywhere this unit is found, you've got cross beds that are moving from the east to the west. And this thing is found from Alabama to the south to Pennsylvania in the north. This thing goes across the entire north-south cross-section of the United States, indicating a time when water is moving across the continent, probably about 1,000 feet above present sea level, moving ocean across the continent, carrying sand, depositing it very rapidly, depositing it in moving water, and simultaneously being hit by earthquakes, enormous earthquakes.
So what we have, I mean, right here in just this small area, we have the clear evidence that this was deposited rapidly, and that there are these cataclysmic earthquakes that are beyond our imagination. They're all happening while all this is still wet.
And there's more, because there's a lens of material here that starts thin over on this side and thin at this side, and it gets thick in between. It's a lens-shaped structure. That's a segment of this sand that while it was being deposited, while it was still soft, it slid down. So the whole area is apparently being uplifted, upended, and stuff is sliding down as it's being deposited. So we not only have rapid deposition, but we also have this whole area being uplifted. Well, what's to the east here? What's the source of the uplift? Not but a few dozen miles to the east, we have the Appalachian Mountains. So while this is being deposited, the Appalachian Mountains are being raised upward very rapidly. Water is going over the top of the mountains, ripping the tops of the mountains off and carrying the debris into this area, depositing the sand, and carrying the sand across the continent. We can trace this wedge of sediment which is thickest at the Appalachians, thinning to the west past the Mississippi River. We've actually found sand grains from the Smokies in the Grand Canyon on the other side of the continent.
That's
So,
just
so
amazing.
there's a time when water was being moved across entire continents, depositing layers of sediment hundreds of feet thick. You've seen it in the Grand Canyon.
Yes,
Those
that's right.
great layers.
Huge,
It-
huge.
Okay, you're just seeing a part of it, 200 miles of it. That's just 200 miles of it. It carries across the entire continent.
Yeah, that gives you the sense of how massive all of this
Almost
is.
incomprehensible. Underneath this unit, remember this unit doesn't belong here, it belongs up above. So if you look at the rocks that are in place here, one of these rocks is one that I used to do some caving in. That caving is done in a cross-bedded oolitic pentramites containing dolomite.
Oh, sure.
You don't have to know what that means. It's just a very specific description of a very specific rock. There's tens of thousands of feet of sediment of rock layers in Tennessee. There's only one, it's a few hundred feet thick, that is a cross-bedded oolitic pentramites containing dolomite. That same unit is on the other side of the continent as well. It's in the Grand Canyon. There's a cross-bedded oolitic pentramites containing dolomite in the Grand Canyon that has caves in it. It's known as the Red Wall.
Oh, yeah.
About halfway down,
Sure,
about
yeah.
halfway down the canyon.
Yeah.
That's the same unit. It's the same lithology, same rock type. Up in Montana, it exists also, tens of thousands of feet. There's one cross-bedded oolitic pentramites containing dolomite. It's got caves in it. Cave of the Winds, for example, in Colorado
That's
Springs.
exactly right.
You're
Yeah.
familiar with
Been
that?
there, I
That's
have been.
in that same unit. You can trace the unit across the entire continent. And so and contained in it are little critters that come from the ocean that have been ripped off of wherever they lived, like coral pieces. Beautiful coral fossils in this. They've been carried, broken from where they live, because coral has to be sitting on a solid surface. If it's sitting in the mud, it sinks into the mud and the little guy dies. Okay, so it's got to be on a solid surface. But we find these coral pieces, beautifully preserved, sitting in what? Mud. We see them sitting in carbonate mud. They can't have lived there. They were only dumped there. So these are living organisms ripped off of some source thousands of miles away, carried across the continent and dumped in places like here and across the continent. So we're talking about a continent-wide scale event that is depositing thick layers of sediment across huge distances, 1,000+ feet above sea level, being carried thousands of miles from where it came from into place, while enormous earthquakes are going on that are the kinds of things you might expect with asteroids hitting the Earth or something, and mountains are being raised very quickly at the same time. That's the flood.
This is part of what Peter is referring to as the Earth being destroyed at that time. So we have the evidence here of the tumultuous moment, but when you talk about little pieces of the coral and so forth, those are pointing back then to the antediluvian period.
Exactly.
And it tells us what was there. What do we see in the rocks here that help us understand more about what that world was like?
Yeah, if we go a little bit further down the same trail, we'll see some of that.
All right, okay.
Let's go on
Let's
down.
do that.
So here we're continuing. That same cliff is now below the trail. It's coming down, and it's coming down towards the river here, towards the creek. And this is where it comes down to the creek and then goes up the other side. And underneath this overhang, we had some cool things to look at. As a matter of fact, right there, see that structure right there? That's a fossil log.
Well, you can even see the bark ridges.
Yep, the impression of the bark. You can see that right there. It's an even bigger one up there with the
you can see that.
curvature.
Sure do.
Curvature of the log. So we've got a number of logs in this particular sandstone unit.
So what is this telling us, Kurt? What are we seeing here?
Well, first of all, we've got evidence in this rock of flowing water. You see this little pebble here?
Right.
That's a quartz pebble. See that extends? It's about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. There's several in here that are 3/4 to an inch in diameter. And a pebble this size, for water to move it, the water has to be moving at a pretty good clip.
Yeah.
Probably moving at about 1 to 2 meters per second. It's moving from the east to the west. The water velocity apparently to carry this size pebble is what's necessary to carry 2-foot diameter logs.
Yeah. that
So
makes
we
sense.
have evidence of moving water, which we saw already with the cross bedding
Sure.
and all that sort of thing, but here we have further evidence in the things it's carrying.
Yeah. So more indications that all of this was just not laid down over a long period of time with very slow processes. But what we're seeing here is something was laid down again rapidly under some tumultuous kinds of conditions.
And it can't be deposited slowly. You just can't move water
Right.
slowly and deposit pebbles this
Yeah,
this
those things would
size.
be sinking to the bottom.
That's right.
Right.
You can't even roll them along the bottom with water moving that slowly. So these are entire units. I mean, everything you can see, you're talking about tens of feet of sediment being deposited at a time. Steve Austin talks about the nautiloid bed, for example, that
Yes.
a 6-foot thick unit being deposited very quickly, basically moving at maybe 200 miles an hour, moving into place and settling in place.
Yeah.
Huge masses of sediment moving very rapidly. That's really the best way to explain
Yeah,
this kind of
and
thing.
all that makes sense.
So we have evidence of the catastrophism of the flood,
Yes.
but also it's carrying evidence of the world that existed before the flood. That world that then was being overflowed with water perished.
Right.
Well, here's an insight into that world. We're seeing logs from forests before the flood. Think about the world's forests. You got forests in the tropics, you got forests in North America.
Yes.
The world's forest. Now, bring a flood on the world, destroy the entire world. You're going to bury some of those trees immediately. But what about the rest of the trees? Floating on top of the waters following the flood must have been trillions of trees.
Huge mass of
Huge mass of trees. We see in Mount St. Helens, for example, right after the eruption of Mount St. Helens, that collapse of the mountain went into Spirit Lake, pushed all the water of Spirit Lake out of the lake, and the water went up 900 feet up the side of the hills around it, swept all of the soil and trees from the sides of those hills, came back into what is now Spirit Lake. At the end of that eruption, there were about 1 million logs floating on that lake. And over the years, they've gotten waterlogged and sank down to the bottom of the lake. But there's still 250,000 logs.
They're still
It's been-
floating there.
It's been 35 years. Now, if you still have logs floating after 35 years from a small thing like that with only 1 million logs, how many logs do you think are floating around on the world's oceans during the flood?
Yes.
And here's some of those logs. So
And
we-
especially in that world before the flood, that antediluvian world, which could have been even more lush than what we have today.
Could well be. In fact, going down the path a little bit further, we can see more information which tells us, yes, there's good reason to believe that it was a even more lush world than today, more trees than today, and a little bit different. If we look at these logs, kind of hard to tell from this location, but they're different kinds of trees than we have in the present.
What kind of trees are
Well,
they?
these turn out to be what are called lycopods. In the present world, we have scrawny little lycopods. We have herbaceous lycopods, soft, short plants, not tall trees. But these are arborescent lycopods. These are lycopods that grew to the size of trees. So they're in that group of plants known as lycopods, but they're unlike anything in the present. And what's really interesting about them is that they're hollow. They're logs that actually don't have secondary wood in the inside. Like the trees you have around here, you cut into them, you're going to find hardwood in the middle.
Right, yeah.
You cut into these, you will not find hardwood in the middle. All you're seeing is the bark, the impression the bark made in the sand. There was nothing in the middle. In fact, some of them are full of sand because there was nothing aside from the bark. And,
Okay.
and so this is that's a weird kind of tree.
It is.
A tree that has no central core with wood in it. What's going on there?
So why would a tree have no inside?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And when we look more carefully at this, we realize we have more parts than just the bark. We find also branches. Branches are also hollow. And we find, well, you would call them roots, but technically they're not roots, they're called rhizoids. But those are also hollow, and the rootlets coming off of the roots are hollow. This is a weird kind of
Okay,
plant,
all
a
right.
whole tree that's hollow in every aspect, in its branches, in its stem, in its roots, in its rootlets.
Okay, there must be a reason for that.
Yeah, I think so. In fact, the rootlets are so soft, and can you imagine a root that's hollow making its way through soil? Could it do that?
I doubt
It's
it.
going to collapse.
Yeah.
So something's odd about this. Now it turns out in the modern world we do have some plants that are hollow, with hollow roots and hollow rootlets coming off of them. Now they're all little plants, they're not trees, but every one of them are plants that live in water. They float on water. So there's air in the inside of the trunk and the roots that allows the plant to float. That's part of what gave me the idea, and actually Joachim Scheven back in the early 80s, he's from Germany, got the idea that maybe these trees are actually floating, that rather than their roots going through soil, their roots intertwine with the roots of adjacent trees. The trees are light enough to float, and you have a floating forest in the pre-flood world. Since they're all bark and they float, once they're floating, once you've destroyed the forest, once they're floating logs, because these are horizontal, they're apparently floating in water to get down to this point. While they're floating, and let's say while they're still floating on top of the water, they rub against one another and peel their bark off. Now once the bark's gone, they're gone, but the bark can then filter down to the bottom of the body of water and accumulate as a pile of bark. And that big log mat can be blown around by the wind and deposit that bark over a large area. And if that was the case, you would expect that perhaps those layers of bark landed on a flat surface, built up on that flat surface. When the log mat blew away, the flat surface would end and other sediment would come on top, and you'd end up with a layer of bark that had a flat bottom surface, a flat top surface. When that bark is then coalified, you'd have a layer of coal. A very special kind of coal that's made of bark. And in fact, if we go down the trail, we can see some of that coal.
Huh. So you would expect that if we have trees that were floating, we'd expect to find a coal bed here somewhere.
Yes,
And there
and we
is.
can do that. So if we follow me, we can go back and we can take a look at one of
After
those
you.
coal seams.
After you.
Well, I know that in past videos, we had shown that because Steve Austin, and he'll mention it next week, Steve Austin did his PhD at the Penn State and defended his floating mat thing and the coal beds that are in Kentucky and whatnot. Not only in Kentucky, but Russia and throughout the United States, down into the Mississippi or the Gulf of America, I guess, down into there as well. Huge coal beds throughout the whole world, and they believe it's because of this. And he'll show you next week in next week's video what he was just talking about. Flat, everything is flat on the bottom, flat on top. Everything in between is coal. It doesn't take billions of years to do it either, and we'll see that next week. Tim, you can bring along your banjo if you want.
These two videos to me have been the best ones for me to not understand the flood, but just to put into context of not even understanding the whole process.
How
is genuine.
cataclysmic it was.
It is like, I mean,
Can you imagine being on Earth with an earthquake the size of making it, 6 feet high, the size might?
earthquake and the flood and the layers from the bottom and the heavens breaking up, and it's just.
Well, think about the first we talked about just a little while ago about the timeline. and how long it has to be for that to be correct. Think about this too. Do we see anything to that magnitude on Earth today?
I think we do, but.
I mean, an 8.8, that's shaking it pretty good,
Yeah.
right? But this was, I mean, I don't know what the seismometer would have done with something like that. It would have broken it.
Can't-
Exactly. There wouldn't be any structure that would be on it today. So, you know, remember, they say that, I think it's what, 17 times the conventional paradigm says that the earth went underwater 17 different times in order to get all of the sediments that, you know, all the layers like that. So it had to dunk. I don't know how long, I have no idea what it calls for, but that, I believe that's what it is. It just doesn't make sense, especially with everything that's going on underneath. I mean, you'd have to be in layers and layers and layers of water, because that boat couldn't have survived without it,
Or, yeah.
you know? So,
Yeah, with the debris floating around there, it'd be a lot of noise going on.
that's why they made the walls really thick.
Mhm.
That dogwood must have been really good stuff, really stout.
What's the Louisiana was just.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all bark, no bite.
oh, that was bad.
Yeah.
Anything else?
But,
Oh, this shows the mightiness of God. And I think that's the reason why those in the conventional want to not even recognize something that powerful.
Even in our own time frame. We look at the Exodus,
Mhm,
you know. Splitting the Red Sea,
mhm.
we just can't comprehend. You know, I think the wind just dried the land, I think God separated, instead of wall of water inside,
Mhm.
and they went through.
Yeah, dry land. I mean, you know, something that's been, that's just, there's nobody else other than God, you can't explain it. And in fact, that's why they try to distance themselves from it so quickly, because they can't explain it.
No, and, you know, when God stopped the sun,
Mhm.
you know, we go, how could he do that? You know, let's stop in the earth and rotate,
Well, when you created it
but.
and can say, okay, I want you to stop for a little while. You know, you and I can't do that.
Well, how much wind would it take to separate the sea?
Well,
The people wouldn't be able to walk through it.
right,
Mhm.
yeah, if it was just wind causing it. Yeah, it could blow the people away.
Well, that's,
But
you know,
I
that,
think God just separated the waters and. You know, dried it off for them and they went across.
well, we know that. How do we believe that?
She's all powerful.
Faith, right? We
He
have
created
faith
it.
that God did that because there's no evidence of it other than his word.
Mhm.
There's no, it doesn't make sense in our puny minds. So we just believe it because God said it.
Well, when Christ was on that ship, right, and the
Mhm.
storm was raging and
Yeah, he was
they
sleeping.
all thought they were so die and. You know, so they wake him up and he goes, peace be still.
Yeah. Cut it out. I got back to bed.
You're scaring my people.
But even his disciples go, with it, who can
Mhm.
tell the wind to stop and the wave to stop and
Mhm.
everything to stop?
Yes, Lauren.
We talk about the great earthquake and I just referenced Revelation 16.
Mhm.
Well, when the seventh angel poured out, but it said, and there were flashes of lightning and rumblings and flashes of the thunder and a great earthquake.
Mhm.
And we think about, we're thinking about the catastrophic earthquake that happened before.
Mhm.
Well, there's nothing new under the sun. It's gonna happen again.
Exactly. And it's gonna happen. Why? Because of man's sin.
Yeah.
And that's the exact reason for the flood and a restart.
And it says that has never happened
Mhm.
since mankind had been on earth. So the
Mhm.
whole point, if we thought that was catastrophic. Or that was just a prelude to something.
I mean, it never rained. And and Noah's here for over 100 years building a boat. What in the world do you need a boat for? All of a sudden, they figured out why. So, I mean, yes, I
Well,
mean,
there's some type of cataclysmic, when are it talks about the mountains. There will be no more islands in the sea.
mhm.
That's even before the millennium, isn't it?
And as a privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
there's gonna
a
be some stuff.
catastrophe because he's going to ruin it. He's going to readjust it again during judgment.
And then he's
This,
gonna
that
set it on
time by fire.
Yeah.
No water there.
And they'll still
Yes,
curse about it.
yep,
They'll still, not repent.
exactly.
Well, how long was it after the Red Sea that they started, they were mumbling and, yeah, grumbling and, you know.
It wasn't very long.
How could they forget, what they just saw? I mean, it's,
Well, those are the ones that didn't make it into the promised land.
Well,
Well, they
after
said-
they sent the
yeah.
captain.
Well, again, it's a choice. I'm not gonna follow you.
Yep.
Yeah, they said the captain. That's stupid. I mean, we look at it and go, how in the world can they be that ridiculous? After God, in a sense, each of the curses picked on one of Egypt's gods, to show that, they worship flies, they worship frogs. They
Worship
gave them
everything
frogs.
but God. And in today's, I read some in Facebook, I don't go on there very often, but they were talking about creationism and what happened during the flood, and you should see all the comments about, blah, 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 and stuff like that, and it's just like, oh, I just,
Well, that's what I'm amazed by is not only how powerful God is, how stubborn, without the Holy Spirit opening your eyes, how stubborn man is.
well, that's the thing, that's why God has to choose us.
They can be face to face with him and apparently and just.
They did, he refused.
I mean, God gives you all sorts of chances, but the minute he calls those people home, well, their home is somewhere different. So,
So we have another chance.
what's that?
So we have another chance to see, what you think.
Yep.
Every valley should be lifted up, and every mountain shall fill and made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and rough places are plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. And not the Lord's oaths. He's not done.
Yeah, to us, that's a blessing. We can't wait for that. For those that don't believe, whoops, it's gonna be absolutely terrifying
There's
for
a
sure.
point, every knee will bow, and then 1,000
Yep.
years later,
Well, thankfully, we're not gonna be at the great white throne judgment. I don't even wanna be there. I don't even wanna watch it. So, all right, let's end off in the word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for this time and for our learning. That of the wonderful things that we see in your earth here today, in your creation. Lord, help us explain it the best that we can, and that hopefully more people will follow with this evidence. We think of today's worship service, Lord, may it be pleasing in your sight. Help us to understand what you want us to understand today. We ask all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.